So welcome everybody to our 2021-2022 budget presentation. This is our very preliminary, this is not line by line. We got numbers a couple days ago, so we have been working to present a balanced budget that is fiscally responsible to our taxpayers, that preserves all people and all programs in our district. And I think that we have a really fair and balanced budget right now. I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Hyde, just so everybody knows you are all muted. If there are any questions, there's a chat feature at the bottom. You can put your questions in the chat box and we'll answer them either as we go or when we're finished. And Mr. Hyde's going to do the fiscal side of this. I'll do the programmatic side. So we're going to kind of tandem and pop your questions in the chat, and Mr. Stevens will monitor the chat. Okay, Mr. Hyde, take it away.
Thank you, Dr. Kaplan. Good evening, everyone. As Dr. Kaplan mentioned, this presentation isn't going line by line. The board members will have the line by line budget prior to the meeting on Thursday. I anticipate early next week. The bottom line is set, but there's still some line items that could change from now until Thursday. So I didn't really want to come out with the line items until we're absolutely certain that we're sure where we're gonna use the money. But like I said, the bottom line is set. So without further ado, Mr. Stevens. So obviously since last March, things have changed drastically. When the 2021 state budget was enacted, there was a pandemic adjustment, which was over 400,000 deduction in state aid, but that was going to be backfilled with federal CARES Act funds so that our financial position was supposed to be status quo. But the governor did freeze foundation aid, and we did see the CARES Act funds. Well, we had to apply for it, but it was approved, so we did get those funds. But then after that budget was enacted, we were then told that we could anticipate that up to 20% of all of our state and grant funds would be withheld. And what we were concerned with was that this withholding was going to become permanent. And I think if you look at some of the schools throughout the Capital District, you'll see some of the larger schools took that to heart and kind of jumped the gun and actually made some staff and program cuts before we really knew what was going to happen with these funds. Then the executive came out with his 21-22 budget proposal. And this definitely was not a good budget for any school district, but particularly ours, being a high need district. The foundation aid was once again frozen. The governor decided to create what he called a services aid category. And basically what that did is it took a bunch of the expense-driven aids and consolidated them into one aid under the umbrella of a services aid. It then capped the amount that the school district could receive in those aids. And it didn't matter going forward how much a school district would spend. So for example, let's say that transportation aid was one of those categories and it's capped at the 1920 spending level. And then all of a sudden we get 10 new special ed kids, which costs a lot of money to transport those kids. Well, that extra expense would no longer be considered in your aids. The aid would be capped at 1920, no matter how much more additional you spent. Excuse me. So then there was a local district funding adjustment. And this was another game that basically traded off state funds and would fill it with federal funds, specifically the federal stimulus package that was approved back in December. So this budget played a lot of games, had a lot of gimmicks that tried to make school districts feel like they were being whole, but it was heavily reliant on federal funds backfilling state funds. And that was where everyone was coming up with this fiscal cliff. If the state wasn't giving us the money and the federal funds were one-shots, then when those one-shot funds went away, there would be a huge gap in school district budgets. Next. So luckily, this past January, we were informed that that 20% withholding, although some funds were withheld, it did not become permanent, and that districts were fully funded for the 2021 school year. So that was the first positive thing that happened for school districts. And then in the 21-22 state enacted budget, it really was beneficial for school districts. For once, I can say that this definitely helped school districts throughout the state. It eliminated that pandemic adjustment that was over the $400,000 that was federal funds. That became a state line item again. It denied that proposed services aid consolidation of the expense-based aids. It lowered the local district funding adjustment was tied to your STAR reimbursement. So again, that was another gimmick that would take away state funds and backfill it with federal funds. So that was denied. So that became a state line item. And of course, the big increase was in our formula-driven foundation aid. And the legislature has made a 3-year commitment to fund the entire formula-driven amount over the next 3 years. So onto our school district budget. Revenues. So this is where our revenues come from. It's the same slide that we use every year because it's a good slide. You can see here that state aid is over $22 million and our school taxes are 7.4 roughly, and that totals 96% of our total budget. So for our purposes, the reason why we have to wait until we get that state aid number is because we don't know what 72% of our budget is going to look like until we get those final aid runs. Federal sources, all other sources account for actually less than 4% due to rounding. So our total revenue, our total budget is $30,463,000. And as I said, that is the bottom line number. Again, this compares the 2021 state enacted budget to the recently 21-22 enacted state budget. It shows the different aid categories, and you'll see the expenditure-driven aid is lumped into one category. And if you just look at the increase and decrease through those rows, you'll see that our foundation aid increased by almost 1.4 million. That was like 10.7% increase, which was, since I've been here in 10 years, absolutely unheard of. Expenditure-driven aid, that increased because the legislative budget allowed the formulas to run as is. Our building aid, slight adjustment just from the timing of when they pull the data from their databases. They used a more recent run, so the number was just corrected. You'll see there that the total increase is $1.86 million. And because that pandemic adjustment went away, it became a state line item. Although the district still received that money, it was through the CARES Act, and now it's actually a state line item. So the actual state funding increased by almost $2.3 million over the 2021 amount. So this is our tax cap calculation for the current year. These are all the different components that go into determining your maximum levy amount. The ones that have the blue arrows are kind of out of our control. We have the tax-based growth factor determined by the state tax and finance department, as well as the allowable levy growth factor. And our pilots are what they are. So all of these factors taken into totality, you'll see that our tax levy has a maximum increase of 1.8% or $137,000. So we go over to the expenditure side. Again, you have another pie chart here just to kind of break down and give you a visual of where our dollars are spent. Salaries and benefits, 58%, debt service, 11%, special ed, 13%, and then all other expenditures account for 17%. And again, there's that bottom line, $30,463,000 for our 21-22 proposed budget. So kind of go into some of the narrative and some of the talking points on this budget. The first thing I wanted to say, and this isn't in the slide, is that if you looked at our 2021 budget and compared it to our 21 and 22 budget, some of the line items might jump out at you because we didn't know what to expect this year. And we knew, for example, that athletics weren't going to be as high, or some of the in-person extracurriculars and things of that sort. We knew we weren't going to have those things. So you'll see a big line item jump. That's because we're going back 2 years ago from when these things actually were occurring. So some things you might look at and be like, oh my God, why is that going up by X thousands of dollars? That would be the reason why. And we'll get into that next week when you see the line items. But that's important to keep that in mind. So anyway, I digress. So our operations and maintenance component, our total increase would be $155,000. This would allow for us to add 2 new full-time positions and allows for increase in materials and supplies and contractual services in order to continue to purchase materials, supplies for disinfecting, deep cleaning, the misters, the backpacks, everything that you see with our maintenance staff using to keep our classrooms and buildings safe and sanitized. Contractual services, again, HVAC, we have to make sure that's up and running. So we see an increase with that with our contractors coming in to repair it, to fix it, to put the MERV 13 filters in to meet the air quality requirements. So that's why that line item goes up by that much. Again, some things that are beyond our control. The $75,000 is an overall increase. That's not the total number. And that's because we have approximately, I think it's 10 kids that are currently either homeless or in foster care that attend a district outside of Waterville.
So Mr. Hyde, can I just chime in here for 1 second, if you don't mind?
Absolutely.
Okay, so I just want to stress how absolutely flat out our cleaners and maintenance staff are done an amazing job to get us up and running, but the state has and will continue to change the mandates, and frankly, it's good practice, the sanitation that we have going on here. So that's why we need 2 more full-time cleaners. We do have a building project and coming up, and some of it has to do with HVAC, but in the meantime, that's heating, ventilation, and cooling. And so it's the heat and it's the air conditioning and the filtration system. And when students are homeless or in foster care, if they're in foster care, wherever they live, whatever district they live in. So if we have a student who originated from Waterville and goes to Bethlehem, is in foster care in Bethlehem, Bethlehem will charge us back for the tuition of foster care students. They could be in foster care, and we have some that have been 10, 12 years, and we have to pay that. So that's one of the tuitions. And the other one is when a child becomes homeless and they are, sharing a house with somebody that lives in Albany, we have to transport them if they choose, if this is their original home school and they were evicted from their house and live in Albany, but prefer to come to Waterville, it's our responsibility to transport them. And so that's where that money comes from. Mr. Hyde.
Thank you, Dr. Kaplan. Excuse me. And the final bullet point on this slide is just increase in the number of students that attend charter schools. So we have a total of 83 students. That's up 4 students from the prior year, and the tuition is slightly over $10,000. So that's where that number comes from.
Okay.
I was just going to say before I turn it over that the total special education budget will increase by $482,000. So having said that, I will let Dr. Kaplan now explain the next bullet point.
It's important to understand with special education, a lot of these costs are out of our control. So if we're a very transient district, and if we have a family move in mid-year and 2 of the children are placed out of district because of their needs, we have to reciprocate that. And so we always have to pad our budget, for lack of a better term, to make sure that these children have their needs met while meeting the needs of our other students as well. We don't want to pull from our regular ed students to support our special needs students. So special education, it is expensive. Many of the children have other services like speech and occupational therapy and physical therapy, special transportation. Sometimes it's door to door, so we contract with buses. Right now, we have a fairly large number of children that are on the spectrum for autism. We have some currently in our kindergarten, and some are in UPK with us, and some are already placed in private placed UPK classrooms for children with special needs. So we cost it out. At any time we get the opportunity to educate our own children, we always try to do that. And so in order to meet the needs of these children with autism, there are some we think we can educate. We're already educating some of them. Not all autistic children need a special classroom. Some are mainstreamed. It depends on their needs. That's why it's called the spectrum. So we costed out what's called an 812 classroom. It will be 8 students between kindergarten and first grade with autism, 1 teacher, and 2 teaching assistants. They will have a social worker for probably half. They'll have a full-time social worker will work half of their time with this specific classroom and the rest with some of the regular ed students. It's a highly structured learning environment with increased instructional staff, additional support. It will also entail professional development for the teachers and the TAs to ensure they know how to work with children that have autism. So this will be a total of 3 full-time employees, 1 social worker and 2 teaching assistants. We already have the teacher. One of the special education teachers are already working with the autistic children. Now, to send a child out of district for an autistic placement sometimes can cost $150,000 a year. Sometimes it's $100,000 a year. It's not less than $100,000. So the children, there are some that still need to go out of district, but we think after costing this out and working with our interim PPS director that we can run this program ourselves. And I think that the parents would be very appreciative to have their children here in district. So that's where that cost is coming from. Next slide, please. So continuing on with special education, we've moved 6th graders up here, which is probably about 100 to 125 more students. It balances the numbers out in both buildings now. We actually have almost identical numbers in both buildings, but the children with special needs, you bring 125 more children in, they have more needs. And so this is going to, their needs will be met with another full-time special education teacher who will be at the Waterbury Junior Senior High School working with 6 through 12 students. The itinerant services through BOCES are speech, OT, PT, and so right now we already use BOCES for these services, but it's going to increase. So if a speech teacher comes here 1 day a week, they may now come 3 days a week to service these children. BOCES is one of those expense-driven aids. So the more we spend, the more we get back in aid. So it doesn't make sense to hire another speech teacher or another OT or PT because we don't need a full-time. We just need them more days a week. And then the employee benefits are for the 2 teaching assistants and the special ed teacher. Anything else you want to add, Mr. Hyde?
Yes, Dr. Kaplan, on the final bullet point, employee benefits. I will address Mrs. Senecal's question. She had asked a few slides ago regarding the new maintenance FTEs that we are budgeting for. And the 155 does not include benefits, but the 608 that you see here does include any new employees' benefits. And how we go about budgeting that is we basically budget for a 2-person plan. So it comes out to be about $15,000 for a 2-person, a little less, $14,000. So if they're a single plan, it comes out to be $7,500. And if it's a family plan, it comes out to be $25,000. So we kind of split the difference, and that's how we budget for the 2 FTEs and maintenance. And not to look a gift horse in the mouth here, but a lot of the business officials that have been attending these webinars and going through what all of these funds mean is that we're worried about what we're calling the fiscal cliff. Although the state budget, let me backtrack. Although the line items that are coming to the school districts are state funds, on a state level, they are relying on 12.6 billion in federal funds in order to make that happen. So across the state, we saw an increase of over 1.4 billion in foundation aid, and that's the largest single year increase that we've seen since the formula's inception 15 years ago. And it's been emphasized that this isn't the first time that a commitment has been made by the legislature to fully fund the foundation aid formula. And everyone everyone being that the ASBO and BOCES state aid planning continues to emphasize that this is simply a promise. And as we've seen in the past, we've heard that promise before 2008 when the Great Recession hit and Governor Spitzer resigned. We saw it back in the gap elimination adjustment, which we just got fully funded from 2 or 3 years ago. And we just saw it last year when they called the pandemic adjustment. So they have ways to say, yes, we're fully funding you. Here's your $14 million. And then you look a few line items below and you'll see, 500,000 taken back in a gap elimination adjustment. So we're just being cautious. We do believe that the current foundation aid level is our benchmark going forward, or our baseline going forward. I haven't even touched upon our federal fund allocations because they really have nothing to do with our budget. They are treated as special aid, or therefore almost like a grant where you have to apply for it and demonstrate how you'll fund, what you'll be using it for, to what you'll fund it with. So that's a conversation after the budget. So that's really all I have for, one more slide, I apologize. Just to kind of remind everyone about the important upcoming dates that we have. The board will be hopefully adopting our budget next Thursday at 6 o'clock. It'll be virtual, so via Zoom. The budget hearing then will also be virtual. That will be on Tuesday, May 11th. At that board meeting. And then the budget vote and the board election will actually be in person this year, or you do have the option to obtain an absentee ballot. And that will be held on Tuesday, May 18th between the hours of 11 and 8. And you can see where the two voting locations are depending on where you live. And you can always find additional information. These presentations, both the videos and the presentations themselves, are available on our website at that address.
So I think with, we only have 23 people on this Zoom. I think we can unmute, and that way if you have a question, you can simply ask us, or a comment or a clarification on something. So Mr. Stevens, if you want to unmute everybody, or give them the opportunity to unmute themselves. So if you want to ask a question, just feel free. Do you want to take the presentation down, Mr. Stevens? Thank you. Questions, comments, anybody? The good news is for students, all programs and all people are preserved. And we did add something that doesn't have a cost factor to it. We have another college offering that will, in September, for a health class, people will have the option of 3 college credits for a health class through Sage College. So that brings the total up to 67 possible college credits that our students have the opportunity to take while they're here. We're also waiting, we're going to apply for UPK full day in hopes of turning UPK back to full day. We're looking for more funding so we know that the half days are a hardship on parents. So we're applying for the full day grant again. The only other thing is Mrs. Webster has a long-term English language learner teacher, long-term sub, that will turn into a teaching position, a full-time position next year. That's all I can think of, unless Mr. Stevens, you have anything to add? Mr. Hyde, questions, comments? Just unmute. What are you budgeting, staff, class size, keeping class? Class sizes, I think we need a little more time with that, but 15 is kind of small. They're usually bigger than that. We're hoping for more or all our students back in person. So class sizes will be normal. Class sizes, I mean, they're usually between, I would say, 18 and 24, depending on the grade level, subject area at the high school.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
So I think, sorry about that. So we got 3 feet guidance from the state education department and the local department or state department of health for elementary school. They're still working on that for middle school and high school due to the level of infection rate that is possible in those populations. And as we look ahead to September, and we know that some of the vaccinations are applying for emergency use in ages 12 through 15, things might look a little different for September. Hopefully we'll be able to go to a 3 feet. It's not called social distancing now. It's called, what's it called now, Dr. Kaplan? I can't, it doesn't ring a bell, but it's not social distance. It's like, I don't know. It'll come to me at like midnight tonight. Anyway, we're estimating that we'll be able to go to a 3 foot distance between student desks, which should double about the size that we can fit into each classroom. So that's kind of what we're looking at as far as where teachers are going. But I think it's also important to know that we didn't add any additional teachers in order to do class size of 15 last year or this current school year. We just reallocated teachers that we already had and moved some people around.
And there's a little caveat to that. So right now they're saying 3 feet with masks on, but when you take your mask off, so to eat lunch, they got to go back to 6 feet. So we have to figure out how to juggle lunches, because we can't have desks 3 feet, have them eat in the classroom. When they take their masks off, then you go to 6 feet. So right now that's the conundrum we are in. Anybody else? Busing right now, they've not changed the guidance on busing. So these are all the hurry up and wait. As of right now, busing will be the same. So we can have more kids come back in. We're going to need more transportation because we can only put one in a seat right now. As of today, that's the guidance. Nothing's changed with busing.
Physical distancing.
Physical, yes. Yes. Well, you are more than welcome to email Mr. Hyde, myself, Mr. Stevens, if there are more questions. We will have line by line budget, like Mr. Hyde said. We're fine tuning all of this. So, I mean, the budget looks good. Programs are preserved, people are preserved, and we're hopefully going to be able to educate some of our highest needs students that we have at the youngest age. Well, we thank you all, and I hope everybody stays safe, and looking forward to an in-person meeting sooner than later. Have a great night, everybody.